Okay, so third point I want to talk about is how prototyping forces you to design for motion. So when we're, it's pretty much the same as we were talking about interaction design. It's very hard to kind of separate interaction and motion from each other. But we don't pay enough attention or much attention at all to motion when we're designing statically. So if you're creating your Figma screens, you're not really thinking probably too much about the motion design. And let's face it, Figma's a great tool, but it's not a motion design tool. It does have some rudimentary prototyping capabilities, but really on the motion side, it's quite basic. One of the key issues for me is the fact that you can't change durations at an object level in Figma. So you can do a transition from one frame to another, but all those durations have to be the same. And if you want to do that, you have to kind of get quite complex in terms of creating kind of lots of intermediary frames to kind of hack that kind of thing. Like I say, great tool, but not a motion design tool. Problem with that is that we do end up delivering all of our design from Figma to our engineering and development teams, and often we've kind of skipped over the motion design part. We're not really thinking too much about exactly how that's going to happen, and it really depends on what you're designing. So if you're designing a mobile app, in comparison to if you're designing a website, the motion is going to be a lot different. You're going to have a lot more motion probably in your mobile app than you would maybe in your website, though that's not always the case, but kind of fundamentally websites tend to be a little bit more basic. If you're doing a TV app, then you've got a different interaction model again, and it's certainly things you need to be thinking about on the motion side of things. So here's an example. So I've got a prototype on the left, which is a feature within Facebook where we've got Facebook stories, and you can see here on the left, this might be a design I might have ended up with if I just handed off the static designs to my engineering team. Especially on the mobile side of things, we have a lot of built-in transitions, and they tend to be quite basic. And the thing is that when you're not considering motion, you're really kind of putting the emphasis on your engineering team to consider the motion for you. And they're often, not motion designers either. They're developers and engineers. They have a lot of experience, but they're not motion designers. And that kind of presents, a few missed opportunities, shall we say. For one, as a designer, you're going to be thinking about motion in terms, or certainly if you're thinking about motion, you can be thinking about how you can use motion to support your brand. So if you've got a really good brand, a really kind of well-defined brand with a tone of voice, you really should have a motion part of that if you think about it. And certainly with brands, that when you think about a brand, you're kind of comparing it. One kind of thing you do within brands, you say, well, if this brand was a person, what kind of person would it be? Well, people speak to you, but they also have body movements as well. They have body language, and you can think about motion design as the body language part of your brand. That's something a developer or an engineer is not going to be thinking about. He or she is going to be thinking about how I transition this particular screen to this other particular screen when this button's pressed. The other kind of really important part of motion that I find is the ability to make your app or your website more usable. So aiding usability, aiding wayfinding, knowing which direction you're going. Motion, if you think about it, in the real world, we have motion. So we have physics. Things don't suddenly appear and disappear. Things speed up and slow down. We have inertia. And we need to be thinking about those same sort of things. Because when somebody's using your app or your website, probably more on the app side, they're kind of expecting it to behave the way things should behave in the real world. So physical products that we're using in the real world act based on the physics of the world. So we've got obviously we've got three-dimensional space that we can move in. We've got gravity. All these things are things that we know of, and we have an expectation of how things will work. So we need to kind of think about those when we're designing as well, meeting that mental model of people and helping them understand how our experiences work. And there's an interesting part to this actually. So looking around the internet, doing some research for this talk, I came across this article on the Nielsen Norman Group, and they talk about something called the aesthetic usability effect. And the aesthetic usability effect apart from being really, really hard to say, refers to a user's tendency to perceive attractive products as more usable. So that's kind of interesting. I mean, this was originally defined apparently back in 1995 by the Hitachi Design Center. And actually, when I was working for Microsoft, I worked for Microsoft on Windows 11 on the prototyping side, worked really closely with the motion design team. And all of there was a lot of motion design that was put into Windows 11 as opposed to previous versions. And it got rave reviews. Like, the motion design kind of contributed to people's perception of the operating system being so much more usable, so much more friendly, so much more performant even as well. So you can use motion to kind of give this kind of feeling of performance. And overall, the motion and the UI, so the kind of the visual design of the UI and the motion kind of work together to kind of give people the feeling that the product was really, really good. And this was kind of the aesthetic usability effect, kind of in motion, to use a pun there.